Welcome back to Faith, Family, and Finance. I am your host, Stacia Williams, and today I'm actually not joined with my regular co-host, George. He's on vacation, not really, but no, I'm actually joined here with my guest, Dr. Diane Voss. I actually met you. You came to one of my women's workshops. As you know, I'm a financial advisor.
My finances were a mess.
Yes.
They're better now.
And so you came to one of my women's workshops. You came in, obviously, to talk about finances, but the way of our meeting, it really kind of went from me supposed to have been advising you to you advising me.
I can't help it. I love to teach.
So nothing wrong with that. But yeah, so why don't you go ahead? I know that you've been practicing medicine for over 35 years. And private practice, you have your own private practice, Reinvent Your Health, located in Independence, Missouri. And she does do telehealth if you're interested in following up with her after watching the podcast. So why don't you go ahead and share your personal journey?
Well, I grew up in a small town, and if I'd have known architecture was an option, I might have taken that. But I really loved people, and I really liked science. And I thought, well, medicine's a great way to put that together.
Yeah.
So I go off to medical school, and I'm going to save the world and make the world a better place. And I got out of school and started doing that. And then I had these patients that would come in, and they'd say, hey, can I take this supplement or that supplement? And I started noticing that they were actually very often the healthy people. And I didn't have an answer for them because we were not taught about nutrition and supplements when I was in school back in the day. So I started reading up about things and started seeing, there's some magic to some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I've always had kind of a holistic attitude in that I believe that it helps if you treat the mind, body, and soul, and you use both alternative or complementary and standard American medicine. There is a time for certain drugs.
Yeah.
But I read a book called The Longevity Plan by John Day several years ago. And it was just fascinating to me. So just to throw out some scary statistics, 7 out of 10 of Americans will die of a chronic disease. And the reason this is significant is like, I don't know about you, but I have this fantasy that one day I'm just going to wake up dead and I'm going to go, God, I am so glad to see you.
That's not exactly how I plan on it going, but...
Well, where are you going to end up?
I mean, no, I'm still going to be talking to God. Just, yeah.
But the thing is, if you're dying of a chronic disease, that is a very slow, very miserable loss of function. And, a lot of my patients would tell me, I don't care if my dad died when I was 50, I'll be dead when I'm 50, so I don't care. And I was like, well, if you just had your heart attack and died, that would be one thing, but that's not how it happens. You just go a piece at a time until you're a cardiac cripple sitting in the chair waiting for the next chest pain that you can't escape. And that is a miserable thing. And I started thinking, what can we do to change this? And is it all beyond our control?
Right.
5 out of 6 Americans will get heart disease or cancer. Right now in the United States, 34% of people are obese and 60% of people are overweight.
Well, and that's a scary statistic because I don't like to think that I'm obese, but I put my numbers in to one of those little apps, those little weight loss apps, and I was devastated that it said that I was borderline obese. And so I mean,
you have to be a little bit careful with those things because there's a lot more to life than height and weight. Yeah. Like if someone's well endowed, that's a little bit of extra weight, but that doesn't mean you're obese.
Right.
If you look like a football player, they might be 1% body fat, but they're built like a tank.
Right.
And so you really have to look at someone's build. Every body has a weight at which you look and feel good. And that is far more important than what's on the insurance tables.
Thank you for giving me that piece. And I like the term well endowed, so I will steer away from obesity.
We don't want you well endowed in the belly. Okay?
If I could pick and choose, if only I can pick and choose.
You can.
But
and that's exactly what I want to talk about.
Yes, yeah.
Is that your genes are not your destiny.
Yeah.
So John Hopkins ranked 37 countries that are the industrialized countries in overall health. And the United States came in 37th, dead last.
Yeah.
We spend twice as much money than Europe does per capita and have less to show for it. Some of the problems we get into, we are told as physicians that we should do preventive health, but there's absolutely no payment for that. There is not a code that I can put down that gets me paid to do preventative health. So we're just supposed to do that gratis. There was a point in my career where I was told I needed to write more prescriptions because I could code higher. I did not like that idea.
Yeah.
I was getting in trouble because of some of my prescribing habits. I found an article way back in the day before it was a thing with vitamin D, showing that people that were low in their vitamin D genetically had more heart disease, more cancer, more diabetes, more depression. So I started putting people on vitamin D, and I got pulled into the office and said, you need to stop doing that because that's not a drug. Now there is now actually a prescription vitamin D. They make it artificial so that they can patent it, and that's what you get if you get a prescription vitamin D.
And so that people know the natural way to get vitamin D, you get vitamin D from the sun.
You get vitamin D from
so
the
going
sun.
outside.
Going outside is good. Morning sunlight is amazing. The problem is if you genetically don't absorb it, you need a huge dose to get the amount that you need.
Okay.
And so some people are going to get more during the summer, and some people aren't. You know, I don't wear sunscreen. I, at that point in my life, was training for sprint triathlons. I was brown as a berry, and when I checked my level, it was 14. Normal is 30 to 100, and optimal is above 60. When you get above 60, you don't get viruses. So significantly decreased viruses.
Okay.
So there's also normal and optimal.
Okay.
And, you know, it's kind of like oil in your car.
Yeah.
You know, there's an optimal level and then there's a kind of normal level. Like, you really don't want it right here.
Right, right.
You want it where it's supposed to be.
Okay.
And, you know, it's like when I went to medical school, there was this little plaque that really impressed me. It says, when all else fails, talk to the patient. And so my patients were coming in and saying, we're interested in alternative and complementary things. So I started educating myself a little bit. One of the problems we get into is in terms of health, you can have lost 40% of function before you start realizing that you have a problem. If you look at some of the testing that we do, say a stress test, cardiac stress test, it doesn't turn positive until there's a 75% lesion. Well, by the time someone's artery is 75% clogged, like they're in big trouble.
So is that why
we don't want to catch it there? We want to catch it way earlier and turn that boat around.
Absolutely. So is that why, I mean, it feels like when you're looking at like social media or even like our Facebook timelines, and people are quote unquote dying suddenly. It could be that they're not dying suddenly, but there could have been a problem that was an underlying issue all along. I mean, that's the dying. I mean, that's what you're referring to.
There are certain things that cause sudden death.
Okay.
But very often someone has an underlying problem that has not been noticed or has been ignored. Okay. Or has had a Band-Aid put over it.
Okay.
So that's a little bit of a different thing.
Okay.
You know, if you look at heart disease, for 40% of the people, the first symptom is death. But as a physician, I have to have a symptom in order to get some of the testing done.
So 40% of people who have death as a symptom. Yeah, that's kind of the end of the road.
That can be an arrhythmia. That can be an abnormal rhythm.
I mean,
that can be a severe, massive heart attack.
Yeah.
You know, now fortunately, that's not what happens to most people.
Okay.
But, you know, look at some of the other statistics. We are 5% of the world's population in the United States, but we take 75% of the drugs, and we are not the healthiest nation. Yeah. So something's a little out of balance there. So 80% of semaglutide is sold in the United States.
Now, okay, in layman's terms, what is that?
Semaglutide is the weekly injection that people are using to treat diabetes, and they're now using it also for weight loss.
That's why everybody's getting skinny. What's the Ozempic? Is that?
Yes.
That's essentially the base drug that's in there.
One of them.
Okay. And you said it's at 85%?
80% of the semaglutide sold in the world is sold in the United States.
Okay. Now, and while we're there, because I think that's a popular thing, Ozempic, or just using the diabetic drugs to lose weight. As people are signing up to do this, what are they not seeing? What would you advise them to be aware of?
Semaglutide is actually a peptide that's found in the body. And we also know that people that are significantly obese seem to have lower levels of it.
Okay.
But the prescription doses are they start at probably around 5 times the natural dose and go up from there.
Okay.
And a lot of the side effects that we're looking at, like decreasing cravings and decreasing appetite, is because it slows down the gut. So if the gut gets too slow, which is also a complication of diabetes sometimes, then you can get constipation, the gut can stop, you can get nausea and vomiting. So those are things that are difficult. The other thing is when you lose weight too fast, you're losing muscle. I mean, we don't want to lose muscle.
Right.
Muscle is what gives us our metabolism. Muscle is what gives us function. Muscle is our vitality.
Yeah.
We just want to lose the fat. And so if you're doing semaglutide, I would encourage you to have 50, 60 to 100 grams of protein a day.
Okay.
And to be doing some kind of weight training, using your muscles at least 4 times a week to support the muscles.
So, and if a person gets off of the drug, do they immediately gain their weight back?
Well, if all you did was took the drug and you quit taking the drug and you didn't change your lifestyle, yeah, you're going to get right back. You keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting.
I was going to say the definition of insanity.
So, if you use a very low dose and you use that, because one of the things people tell me is that they don't think about food all the time. They actually develop a healthier relationship with food that allows them to make better choices. Well, I'm all for that. And with that help, then you can start making better choices and changing your lifestyle. And it's not a diet. It's finding something that works for you. And that's going to be a little bit different for each person. But what got me interested in this whole thing is I have so many patients that come in and say, well, my dad had this, so I'm going to get it because I'm a lot like him. Or, well, this runs in my family, so I'm dead anyway. And I was just like, that's terrible.
Yeah.
What can we do about that? And I read the book, The Longevity Plan by John Day.
Okay.
Several years ago. And he went over to Bapan, China, which is called Longevity Village, because in Bapan, China, about 1 in 100 people lives over 100 and remains functional. Because to me, it's not about how long I live. It's about how much fun I'm having.
Quality of life.
Right?
Yeah.
How functional I am, how much I'm contributing to the world. And to put that in perspective, in the United States, there's 1 in 5,780.
Okay. That live to
makes it past 100 and remains functional. And in Japan, it's 1 in 2,000. So you look at that and you say, well, what are these guys doing? So they looked at the lifestyle, and in a place like Bapan, China, they don't have to choose.
Right.
They're mostly vegetarian because in ancient history, if you had a herd, a marauding army would come through and kill off the herd and you would die. So they're farmers and hunters and gatherers. And so they're not vegan or vegetarian, but they seldom eat meat because if a boar runs through the village or a turkey gets close, everybody has some, but what they're growing is primarily vegan. They don't have a lot of, at the time that the book was written, they didn't have a lot of transportation and things. So they tended to get up with the sun and go to bed with the sun. We have things that if we wanted to do that, we would have to choose to do it. In China, most people are lactose intolerant, so they don't keep dairy cows because they're not drinking milk. Whereas if we were going to go off of dairy, we'd have to make that choice. So it's a little bit easier. So he's doing all these things, and he finds that at the age of 100 in Bapan, China, 4% of people have heart disease and 2% of people have dementia. Okay. And the contrast to that is in the United States, at that time in 2017, I think was when the book was written, and it might be worse by now. At the age of 85, 85% of Americans have significant heart disease, and 50% of Americans have significant dementia. And, they're thinking, well, it's just those lucky Chinese genes. The rest of us are just, out of luck.
Yeah.
But being scientists, they went and did the genetic profiles, and they discovered that the genetic risk was exactly the same. So if the genetic risk is exactly the same, then you can infer that the difference between 85% and 4% and 2% and 50% is lifestyle.
So in other
that means we have control.
Yes. So one of the things, especially in the Black community, is that we believe that because grandma had high blood pressure, or because, our mothers had, or our fathers had diabetes, that's something that we are prone to. So in talking...
let me give you an interesting statistic. So they did an autopsy series, and I don't know what year this was. I think it was before 2015. In St. Louis, Missouri, they did 632 autopsies, and of those people, 136 had significant heart disease. So they went to Uganda, and they specifically age matched those people, and out of 632 autopsies, there was 0 heart disease.
So what's the difference?
So your grandma didn't develop hypertension until she came to the United States, or was forced to the United States, and started eating our food. If you look at pictures of people in the United States on the beach in the 1970s, they're not overweight.
Right.
This is something that's happened because our food chain has changed. We have multiple chemicals on our food that are illegal in other countries.
I have heard that, especially in Europe. Let me ask you, vegan, earlier you were talking about vegan, vegetarian versus essentially eating meat. So a lot of times you hear, is it good to be only vegan, vegetarian, or are we okay with eating meat? It's just the type of meat that we're eating.
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a fascinating book that I read recently called How Not to Die by Michael Greger.
Okay.
And I will warn you, he is vegan.
He's gluten. You said he's what?
He's vegan.
Vegan. Okay.
And he decided that after his grandmother was in one of the original studies done by Pritkin in the 1970s, where his grandmother was sent home on hospice with heart disease. And she got put in this study and went on a vegan diet and went from having angina all the time to walking 3 blocks by changing her diet within about 3 weeks. Now, in 3 weeks, your cholesterol is not going to change that much. But so they're assuming that that's because there's toxins in the food and inflammation related things. I don't believe there's any such thing. We are bio-individual. Everybody's different. You know, I have a son who, if I don't feed him meat twice a week, he literally wilts. I would not try to get him to be vegan. I personally feel best when I'm vegan and eat a little bit of fish, kind of pescatarian.
Okay.
But I never set out to be vegan. I just realized as I was reading the book, I was like, you know what? I haven't bought any milk, eggs, or meat in more than 8 months. I just started doing what I call intuitive eating, which is eating what my body was asking for instead of what my head was asking for. Because if it was my head, we'd be doing donuts and Pop-Tarts and those things. But luckily, I've got my head kind of off the little chatter to the side. And I'm asking my body what it wants. And, we do this to our kids.
Yeah.
You're a good girl. Have a cookie.
That's true.
You finished what you needed to. Have a Tootsie Roll. And I don't remember my mother ever saying, you're a good girl. Have some broccoli. Yeah. If she did, I probably didn't hear it.
I mean, that's
so we get this emotional attachment to certain things.
Yeah.
And as adults, when we want to feel better, we go have that. Well, if you're only feeling bad occasionally, that's not a bad thing. But if you're having a bad day on a regular basis, you're reaching for that to raise your dopamine on a regular basis and remembering how grandma made you feel. Just some statistics from that book. You look at just diabetes. If you decrease your meat from a serving of meat every day to a serving of meat once a week, you decrease your risk of diabetes by 28%.
Okay, say that one more time.
If you decrease the amount of meat you eat from 1 serving a day to 1 serving a week, you decrease your risk of diabetes by 28%.
But I thought you just said it was okay to eat meat.
You are in charge. you get to choose where you want your risk to be.
Yeah.
If you eat fish and don't eat other kinds of meat, you're going to decrease your risk of diabetes by 50%. If you go vegetarian, you decrease your risk of diabetes by 61%. And if you're vegan, you decrease your risk of diabetes by 78%. And what we're finding is actually the animal fats. When the animal fats get in the muscle doesn't respond to insulin as well.
Okay.
And here, what we've been telling people, well, cut out all the sugar, cut out all the carbs. And you're like, I'm still gaining weight. I don't know why. And it's because the animal fat decreases your sensitivity to insulin. And everybody's like, well, coconut oil is a saturated fat. It's also a vegetarian fat. If you read through the Bible, it doesn't sound to me like people were vegan.
No, for sure not.
And we have a situation where, the whole land of Israel is saved by wheat and corn, but the wheat and corn that we are eating is not the same that they had.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's genetically modified starting in the 1970s with the dwarf wheat. It's much more productive, and that's why we were set out to become the breadbasket of the world. But people from America go to Italy and eat pasta and things there, and they're fine, and they eat the same things here made with American wheat, and some of them have a reaction to it.
I want to go back to even speaking on the fact that our genes aren't our destiny. In conversation, we were talking about diseases, and we were talking about how it's not that we inherit the diseases from our parents. It's not that it's genetically passed down, but we inherit the bad habits.
We have a
parents.
Genetic susceptibility. So certain genes are just there. Like if someone has Down syndrome, that's a genetic disease, and
absolutely
they're stuck. But most of our genes can be turned on and off.
Okay.
And it's our lifestyle that turns those genes on and off.
Gotcha.
And our lifestyle is, I believe, what we get from our parents. If you look at Africa and how people were eating, they weren't eating chitlins and bacon.
They weren't. I've never.
They were eating lean meat because that meat was They were eating lean meat because that meat was running away from them. And they
eat bush meat.
And they were eating roots and tubers. I'm not an expert on that, so somebody's going to correct me. But it's if you look at like the Chinese, who did well in China, and you move them to California, they get really sick. You look at Central America, the Pima Indians in Mexico and Central America, they're healthy until they come to the United States, and then they're all diabetic. It's even the American Indians, they were doing fine, smoking the peace pipe. We bring alcohol, they're in trouble. It's like we have developed some mass marketing and some mass manufacturing processes that are not healthy with the body. I'm old. When I was in second grade in the 1970s, 120 kids in my class, one kid had food allergies. Steve. And I'm not going to say his last name. And I felt so sorry for him because he was overweight. His eyes were running all the time. His face was always blotchy. He was not a happy boy. And, I remember it because I wasn't allowed to take peanuts to school because he had a peanut allergy. And if he saw a peanut, he would eat it.
Despite the allergy, that's most of our stories.
And I liked my peanut butter sandwiches. My mom gave me egg sandwiches instead, and I was like, how come he's not allergic to eggs? One person out of 120, and now they're saying that something like 20 to 25% of the population is gluten intolerant, and we're not even sure if it's actually gluten that people are intolerant to. If it's actually the glycophosphates. I feel better when I don't eat gluten, so I stayed off of it.
So, give an example.
But when I did the genetic testing, it was actually the glycophosphates that my body wasn't clearing, which is the fertilizer.
So, a lot of people aren't aware of gluten-free. I mean, especially in the generations after your generation. We read these things on the packaging, but we don't necessarily take the time to research and understand. So when you talk about gluten, or the fancy word that you just said after gluten, what is that? What is gluten?
Gluten is the protein that's in wheat.
Okay.
And so some people truly have a true allergy to it, and a significant number of people actually are not truly allergic but have an intolerance. And the intolerance will cause, bloating and cramping and digestive alterations.
So it's a wheat allergy.
There's intolerance and there's allergy, and they're two separate things.
Okay. Is that the same thing as being lactose intolerant? Is that also?
Yeah, lactose intolerance is the inability to metabolize milk.
Okay.
The lactose part of the milk. So there's actually two different types of milk allergies. There's the casein, which is the protein in milk. So I remember when I was a child, my grandpa was driving along and he goes, "You see those cows over there? Those are Holsteins, those are for meat. You see those cows over there? Those are Jerseys. Those are for milk." And I'm 7. I'm like, so I'm not a farmer. But it turns out that some human beings tolerate the A2 milk very well, but it's the A1 milk that causes much more intolerance.
Okay.
And the cows that produce the A1 milk actually produce more milk and can be milked 24 hours a day. So industry has replaced the A2 with the A1.
So where's the A2 milk at?
Target. Hy-Vee.
Okay, so
if you have a farmer that has cows and they've been tested, most of them try to get A2 cows.
Okay, so A2 is better than A1
for some people.
So,
like, I'm not lactose intolerant, but when I drink A1 milk, my brain doesn't work quite as well.
Okay.
I can drink A2 milk and I'm okay.
Okay, gotcha.
Most of these things are very, very subtle. So people say, well, I don't have any food allergies because I never break out in hives. But I never considered that I had a gluten issue because I was eating bread all the time, every day. I get migraines. My mom got migraines. My grandpa got migraines. 2 of my 3 kids get migraines. And I'm like, well, that's genetic, right? Well, guess what? When I went off gluten, I quit having migraines.
So gluten.
But the interesting thing is, my son made me some croissants, and I had been gluten-free for a while, and I'm like patting myself on the back because I'm eating healthy, I'm doing good, I'm feeling good. My son makes me a croissant, and so what am I going to say to my 14-year-old boy? Mother is gluten intolerant. You snide. Why did you do that? Of course not. You go, "Your mama's favorite. Give it here." About 36 hours later, I thought I had a pickaxe in the back of my head, but we also had a weather change, so I thought, well, it must be the barometric pressure. Now, this boy is my teacher, right? So about 5 days later, he comes back to me and he goes, "There's one croissant left, Mama. Would you like it?" And what do I say? "I'm gluten-free." No, I say, "You're still Mama's favorite." I hope my other kids are not listening. It's only because of the croissant. So he gives me this croissant. 36 hours later, my head is about ready to pop off. So in the normal course of life, I would have never put together eating something and having a headache 36 hours later.
Yeah.
Some of the things are very subtle. A little bit of brain fog.
Yeah.
Well, most of us have brain fog because we're not getting enough sleep, our hormones are out of balance, we're over 15,
Yeah.
We've got a whole lot of excuses for why that is. And it's like people always tell me, well, I have this, that, or the other. It's because I'm old. Age is not a disease. There are several diseases associated with age. But age itself is not a disease. The diseases are caused by improper maintenance of the beautiful machine that we are. If you're driving your Honda and you got 200,000 miles on it and you never change the oil, it's not going to be doing well.
This is true. So let me ask you this. Personality types have been associated with certain diseases.
Yes.
I want to talk about that.
Heart disease, for instance. Most people that have heart disease, obviously smoking and being overweight and having high cholesterol are risk factors, but the personality risk factor is the hot reactor and the person who can't let go of their anger. If you look at breast cancer, and these studies are done in Germany, I haven't seen them here in the United States, the personality profile of the person with breast cancer is the person who stuffs their emotions, who doesn't get enough sleep, tends to lower your melatonin levels, who takes care of everybody but themselves, who puts themselves last, and who takes too much responsibility, blames themselves for things that aren't necessarily their responsibility.
Oh, wow.
And in some of the German things, the side of the breast cancer actually has to do with where the conflict is, whether it's generational or whether it's partners. And the partner can be a business partner or a romantic partner or anything like that. So some of those things are very interesting, and I think they do have some bearing on there. Gabor Mate, who talks about trauma and the effect of trauma, he says, I did hospice for years. I did hospice for 10 years. And we have so much more control over our lives than we realize. And you start seeing that when you work with hospice patients. There's so much healing that happens right before death. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but people really start thinking about their priorities.
Yeah.
and making some shifts. But Gabor Mate was saying that he was getting sick because he was reading all these obituaries of people in their 50s that were dying of cancer. And it said, she was a giver. Even while taking chemotherapy, she still did 83 different things and went this, that, and the other way all the time. Oh, he was a giver. Even as he was dying of cancer and on chemo, he still was a doctor and went to the hospital every day and took care of everybody. And we make it sound like that's a great thing.
It's
but
not.
The reality is these people were buying love with service, and they put themselves last. And that is Gabor's take on it.
So too much of a good thing can truly be a bad thing.
There has to be a balance. You can't serve from an empty cup.
I believe that too.
And like I said, this is Gabor Mate's work. I don't have numbers on that. But it's kind of interesting. In Germany, they were looking at people with Parkinson's. And they said very often when someone has Parkinson's, the father is highly critical and says, you're not good enough. And very often, a child in response to that, we don't ever seem to get middle of the road.
Yeah.
If one of your parents is an alcoholic, you either are an alcoholic or a teetotaler. Very seldom do you actually have a normal relationship with alcohol.
Right.
And like with the persons, according to the German study that got Parkinson's, when the father figure says, you're not good enough, you'll never amount to anything, they either choose not to do anything and fail, or they become highly successful. But the person that classically gets Parkinson's gets very successful, and then at some point in their life, they have a second betrayal that makes them feel like they're not good enough. Their business fails, their wife leaves them, their kid dies, something that they internalize as, I'm not good enough. And they develop Parkinson's within 6 months of that second insult. And these things, you actually see changes in the blood flow of the brain on PET scans. I find it fascinating. We're not really doing that in this country, and our system's not set up for that. But my only point is how we handle stress, how we view ourselves, what we believe about ourselves has a huge impact on our health.
Speaking of how you view yourselves, one of the things that I was most impressed with you is your story and the fact that you have beat cancer several times. And
1.5.
Yeah. Which, for some, not everybody can share even that story. But I think it's important to speak to someone or speak to people that are dealing with cancer or whose family's dealing with cancer. You shared a story with me about a guy who cured his cancer by laughing. And
I believe that was Norman Rockwell wrote a book about it, that he felt that he cured his cancer by spending an hour a day laughing.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because, the statistics for cancer they're collected in a way that's counterintuitive. So my mother got breast cancer when she was 27, and she was told that she had 6 months to 2 years to live. And she was told that every 2 years when she had a recurrence, and she managed to live, I think, 14 years.
Oh, wow.
But she said to herself, I am not going to die until my children graduate from high school. And she died 4 months after my brother graduated from high school. And at first I was so inspired by that. I'm like, they gave her 6 months. Yeah. And she's like, no. And now I'm like, dang it, why didn't you say until my grandkids graduate from high school?
Yeah.
It's not like raising the bar.
Right.
And, because the way they collect the statistics, if you survive 5 years, you're considered a survivor. So my mother died at 42, but she's considered a survivor. So I actually got breast cancer the first time at 42 because my mother made a lot of lifestyle changes, not eating processed foods and avoiding certain things and exercising on a regular basis. And I did those things, and I do think it helped. If you look at my family history, 5 out of 9 women in 3 generations were dead before the age of 50. I'm the first one to make it past 50. Now, some of those generations, we don't know that they were breast cancer because it's not recorded. And in the past, you didn't talk about that because it was unmentionable.
Yeah.
But when you have women dying in their 40s of something, colon cancer or breast cancer would statistically be the most likely. And because myself, my cousin, and my mother all have breast cancer, I'm assuming that the others were also breast cancer. There's a little bit of assumption there. So my cousin was diagnosed within 2 months of myself. When I had the diagnosis, I called her up and said, "You all need to be checking yourselves." And she called me back and she says, "I got a lump." And I'm like, it's a good thing we said something because most 27-year-olds aren't doing breast exams.
Yeah.
And breast cancer generally is a disease of older women. It's interesting when we say, well, it's caused by estrogen, but it happens after we're estrogen deficient for most people. I'm like, that's interesting. She changed her lifestyle incredibly. She completely de-stressed her life, and she eats really clean, no junk food ever. If she comes to visit me, she brings her food with her so that she never cheats. If we go out to eat, she eats before she goes and doesn't eat any junk. And she's a survivor. Now, I didn't do as well as she did, and mine's come back.
Yeah.
And I attribute that to suppressed emotions, most likely, to stress and to not getting enough sleep. So I'm making those changes now because I'm kind of a slow learner.
Yeah, it's okay. You're still here, so you still have time.
I'm still here. There's another really fascinating book. It's called Radical Hope, and I think that anybody who has any diagnosis of cancer should definitely read it. This lady was a PhD and was counseling people, also working with hospice people. And she had this guy that went home on hospice, and he said, "I don't accept this. I choose not to die." And he cured himself. And she got so excited. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, the doctors must be excited." And she goes, "The doctors were not excited at all." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." Now, I don't know if that's true. I wasn't there with the doctor. I mean, as a doctor, I get really excited when these things happen. And I think most doctors do. But she thought, well, if nobody's going to look into this, I'm going to look into it. So she started interviewing people who beat cancer. And I believe at last count, she had a total of like 6,000 people. And so she tried to come up with, what do these people have in common? One is that they exercise at least 20 minutes a day. One is that they have a spiritual connection and they make a point to get in a space of gratitude or appreciation every day. Not necessarily Bible study, not necessarily church, not necessarily, they could be Buddhist or Muslim or Christian, but they believe in a spiritual connection and they purposely connect with it on a regular basis. So it's a spiritual practice. Empower yourself. Don't give your power away and let someone make all your decisions for you. At least have some interaction and some say in it. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying go in there and argue with anything that your doctor recommends.
Right.
Definitely not. And I'm not saying don't do standard medicine, but I'm saying educate yourself. And if something feels off to you, or if you don't agree with it, ask questions or get a second opinion. One thing is increase your positive emotions. Spend more time being happy. Spend more time being grateful. One was people following their intuition. Like, I just don't think this is going to work for me. I think I want to try that. When you get those intuitive hits to follow them. The other thing that really high on the list was releasing suppressed emotions. Yeah. And certain personality types just keep it all in. And emotions are not good or bad. Anger tells you that somebody crossed your boundary. But staying angry eats at you. And it doesn't hurt the other person. It only hurts you. When you're not forgiving somebody, it doesn't hurt them. Right. They move on with their life.
Absolutely.
I was watching a Christian show, and this lady was saying, the guy was going, "You need to forgive." And she's like, "I'm not forgiving my husband." And the preacher's like, "Well, so you're divorced?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, how long ago?" And she goes, 20 years. And she's like, "Oh, well, what's your husband doing?" "Well, he's married and has a whole new family and a great house and a new career." And the preacher's like, So you've let him ruin your entire life.
Yeah.
And he's still controlling you.
Yeah.
And he's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I think there's a message within that.
at times, that's what we do. You know, forgiveness is for us. It's not for the other person. And every single religion says forgive.
Right.
Most religions have something about fasting.
Yeah.
You know, there's probably a reason. It's probably good for us.
Right. Absolutely.
You know, people that did well with cancer radically changed their diet. And this got very confusing to me. I made so many books. You know, one book says, well, you got to be vegan. And the next book says, no, you got to be raw vegetarian. And the next book says, no, you got to be keto. And the next book says, well, you got to be an omnivore. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's like, if you read 50 books, you're going to get 50 answers. And I think the real answer is that, number one, you make a change because you're telling your body, I'm making a change because things are not going to be as they are. So I think that's part of it. But I also think whether you become vegan or vegetarian or keto or whatever, you're tending toward more healthy stuff. Like nobody does junk keto. Mm-hmm. You don't do keto eating pizza rolls. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know. Now there is such a thing as what I call dirty vegetarian. Well, they say they're vegetarian, but they don't eat any vegetables. That doesn't count as vegetarian. If you say you're vegetarian and it means you're eating no meat and all you're eating is rice and pudding and
I was going to say I used to wonder
that doesn't count.
how there were overweight vegetarians, and I quickly
because
learned.
That's what I would call dirty vegan.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying don't have pasta, but if you look at the Mediterranean diet, serving size of pasta is a half of a cup. Mm-hmm. So you know if you go to Greece, they serve you a nice big salad, and then there's a little side of pasta to make you feel better. You know, it's Makes sense. Here we have a nice big pasta and a little bit of salad to make us feel better. The other thing is that besides diet change is that these people routinely were taking herbs and supplements. Mm-hmm. And, you know, maybe that's placebo effect. I don't know. Maybe those things were very medicinal for them. You know, it's hard to tell because I don't have access to that data. Another thing is an extremely strong reason to live. Like my mother said, I will not die until my children are out of high school. Mm. There's a difference between not wanting to die and choosing to live. Yeah. And you can't just say, well, you know, I choose to live. I know people in their 40s who aren't living. Yeah. They're just going through the motions. Yeah. There's no joy. There's nothing to look forward to. There's no purpose. They're not making the world a better place. Yeah. You know, and then you find other people who are just, they're in the process of dying, but they are living for the first time in their life. Mm-hmm. And there's something beautiful about that. Absolutely. There really is. When their eyes light up, you know, and you go, this is it. The other thing is social support and social connection. Mm-hmm. And I think we saw very clearly during the COVID shutdowns and things that when you isolate people, it causes problems. Yeah. You know, the pharmacies were running out of Xanax. Yeah. Xanax is not going to fix your anxiety. It just covers it up so you don't have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. You know, we can easily get critical of people. You know, it's very common for people with emphysema to have anxiety. Well, I think it's more likely that it's common for people who have anxiety to turn to cigarettes. Yeah. And, you know, try holding a bag over your face and not breathing. You will have anxiety. You know, people like, well, you know, so-and-so's an alcoholic. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I think I'm going to be a darn drunk today. Yeah. I don't believe that at all. So it's a byproduct. That person is waking up and they're in pain, whether it's physical or emotional, psychological, whatever. And the alcohol gives them a reprieve from that pain to the point that they get to where they don't know what it's like to live. And they don't know who they are when they're not altered. And you got to have some compassion for that. That doesn't mean you condone it. That doesn't mean you enable it. And you know, I'm a great enabler. I'm so good at that. Fortunately, not at work. I'm finally over it because I know what the problem is now. So how do you? Okay, because there is a fine line between support and enabling. You don't want to add more stress to those people, which essentially turns them to their bad habit. So how do you find? How do you support people who are going through, whether it be cancer or who have a chronic illness, or if they're alcoholic? How do you provide support? Like, is there a definition for healthy support? Yes. First of all, you have to have boundaries. Yes. You can't do something just because they asked. If you have somebody that's ill and you're doing everything for them, they're going to lose function. They got to be getting up. They got to be doing what they can, not to the point of pain, not to the point of exhausting their bodies. But, we all need to feel kind of normal.
Yeah.
Laying in bed, you don't feel normal. And we need that. We need to feel capable as human beings. Like, the one thing you can cause great problems with kids is if you don't allow them to feel capable of something.
Yeah.
We all need to feel capable. We all need to feel like we're contributing, even if that is knitting hats for the orphan babies. It doesn't have to be a great thing. You can make a huge impact in the world just by smiling at somebody. That's a contribution.
Yeah.
You don't have to be Deepak Chopra to make the world a better place. You just need to be nice to one person. And the world's a better place. And sometimes I think we forget how easy that can be. But if you look at something like alcoholism, if you're allowing them to drink in your presence and you're being hurt by their choices, then you're enabling them. Now, everybody has free will.
Yeah.
But once somebody's down that path that far, they are not capable of stopping on their own. They need a boundary. And so if you're buying it for them or if you're making excuses for them, I had a situation in my family where there was somebody that was in jail for alcohol. But the story at Christmas was, oh, he's with his girlfriend. No, let's tell the truth here.
The family secrets, for saving face.
Because we're not even admitting to ourselves that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And you got to have compassion for why that person is in that place.
Yeah.
I've made some bad choices in my life. If I beat myself up, change never comes through shame and guilt.
Right.
Change comes through compassion, understanding, and support. But enabling is when you are participating in their illness. If you're buying cigarettes for the smoker, if you're buying alcohol for the drinker, if you're allowing them to treat you like crap, you're enabling. If you just loving them, loving is never enabling.
So I think that when you talk about participating in their illnesses or enabling, and you talk about just loving them, I find that some people believe that they don't understand the difference between making someone feel loved and actually loving them. So when you make someone feel loved, that's essentially you're doing what it is that makes them happy. You're doing what it is.
Getting your way.
Yeah.
Never makes you feel loved.
Yeah. People think that people actually think that
it makes you feel like you won. It makes you feel like you won.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make you feel loved. Because unconditional love is when somebody loves you regardless.
This is true. Yeah.
So I was reading a book the other day, and this guy was saying that he's a list maker, and he gets with this girl, he called her Megan, and he would say, so why do you love me? And she's like, oh, I don't know, I just do. And it kind of upset him because he's like, and then she'd go, well, why do you love me? And he'd go, well, I love your smile, and I love that you help people, and I love that you dress so well, and I love that you're great at art, and I love this and that and the other. And she'd go, oh, that's nice. And then a month later, he'd ask her, why do you love me? And she'd say, I don't know, I just do very, very much. And he finally realized that what he was getting from her was unconditional love, and what he was giving her was conditional love. He was labeling it conditionally. Because if you love somebody because of their great smile, do you love them if they're not smiling?
True.
If you love somebody because they're making a great impact in the world, are you going to love them if they lose their impact? If you love somebody because they know how to dress, are you going to love them when they're in sweats? Now, the reality is because he loved her, he loved her smile.
Right.
Because he loved her, he felt proud of what she was doing. But when he got to where he could say, I just love you just because you exist.
Yeah.
And what do we do to our kids? You have to do this, this, and this to earn my love.
That's true.
And then we don't feel good enough.
That's true.
We're never good enough.
Yeah.
But when you can just be loved just because you exist, and I have, one of my kids, I remember, I think it was a third one. I don't remember. I was exhausted at that point. And it's 3:00 in the morning, and they have one of those poops that goes all up the back of their head and everything, bust out everywhere. It takes a whole package of wipes to get that goo off. Like you get
throw the onesie away,
and you're like,
I'm not washing that.
And of course they're fussing because they're hungry, and they're like, just feed me. And I'm like, I'm not even touching you. And you get them all wiped up, and you're just like, it's a good thing I love you because this is disgusting. And you finally get them fed, and you get them burped, and you lay them on their in your chest, and you feel a little heart doing, and their little breath is like, and they got that new baby smell.
Yeah.
Because they don't start stinking until you feed them meat.
Right.
It's funny.
Try
this sometimes. If you go off meat, your BO goes way down.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's interesting.
Okay.
It's like, not that I would ever do that
for
that reason.
But that makes sense as to why that would be.
Yeah. Interesting. And he's laying there, and he's, I think, 3 months old or something. And he just melted into me. Now, I know that it's really that he doesn't have spinal tone yet and can't sit up. He's not really melting into me, but I needed to feel like he was melting into me. Yeah. I was having a bad night. I'm sitting there rocking, and I'm listening to the train whistle at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's an owl the other way, and the moon's shining off. It's like, this is as close as I'm ever going to get to truly unconditional love, because I have not disappointed him yet, and he has not disappointed me yet. And we're not ever been angry with each other yet. Yeah. And I just had to sit there and enjoy it for like the rest of the night. I was really tired at work the next day.
So do you think, let me ask you this then, when you talk about conditional versus non-conditional love, so our podcast, Faith, Family, Finance, we talk a lot about the family aspect, the marriage aspect. How can marriage comes with conditions, right?
If you put them on it.
Well, but there's certain, when you say if you put them on.
I do think there are boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to say.
And expectations.
I think expectations you need to discuss.
Yeah.
Because we bring those expectations from our families, and we don't realize that other families don't do it the same way.
That's true. That was actually one of my big issues.
My dad would go, we lived out on the farm, and so the car was kept in a separate shed, 100 feet away from the house. And my dad, every night, my mom worked nights, my dad every night would go get the car, and he would bring it up and leave it running for my mother. And every time we went anywhere, he always opened doors for her.
Such a gentleman.
And that's the way that he showed her that he cared.
Yeah.
And no matter how mad he was, or how many fights they were in, or they could not be speaking for 5 days,
and he would
still do it, because it was like, I don't like your behavior, but I love you.
And this is how I'm going to show my love.
And I'm going to show it. So I start dating, and none of the guys are open the door, so I just thought none of them liked me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm emancipated. I can open my own damn door.
But
it has nothing to do with whether I have the capacity to open the door. It has to do, like, I open doors for other people all the time. And it's really interesting, because a lot of times I'll open doors for a guy, and I do it as a courtesy, because they're a human being. And some of them get so upset. You have to open the door for me. And I'm like, it's just a courtesy, because you're a human being.
Right.
And I looked in your eyes and I said, you're a human, and I will do this because it's a courtesy, and I value you because you exist.
Absolutely.
Not, well, I think you're incompetent, dude.
Which, that's a story for a whole nother day.
And some other people, they look at it and their shoulders drop and they smile and they go, oh, thank you. But what happens in marriage is we have expectations that are not realistic, because we are responsible for our own happiness. It's not that person's job to make us happy. Now, that person is the icing on our cake, and I happen to like icing.
Yes.
But it's my job to make me happy. I cannot make anyone else happy, and I got my work cut out for me to make myself happy.
Okay, so hold on. So you said it's not my responsibility to make my spouse happy. It's their responsibility to make themselves happy. And then I just enhance that. I add to that.
Enhance it.
So
it's your job to not make them unhappy.
I guess, so if you have a deeper...
But think what a burden that is.
To make somebody happy?
If your husband can only be happy because you make him happy, that's a burden.
Do you know that?
But if your husband is happy, and you love him, nothing will make you happier than bringing him joy. And that's why we do things that we don't necessarily want to do. Like, I will sit through a blank game, because I'm going to get somebody mad at me, that I hate. But I will go. I will not complain. I will enjoy it. I will do everything so that person has a good experience, just because I love them.
Yeah.
And if you go and you're begrudging, well, I'm doing this because I love you, that's not love.
Yeah.
That's, I'm holding you hostage and I'm keeping count.
Okay. So I think that there's
we can't make our children happy.
Yeah.
We can teach them how to create their happiness. We can teach them how to find their happiness. We can teach them that happiness is important. We can teach them that happiness is allowed. they have to make their own happiness. But as parents, we wish we could make them happy. We wish we could fix everything. And we just can't. We can't control other people. The only person I can control is myself, and that's marginal most of the time. But when we are whole, the type of relationship that we are capable of having is a much more elevated whole relationship.
So essentially the reason why, I guess you can say divorce happens is because people within themselves.
They go in with an expectation of something that the other person either can't or won't meet. Yeah. If we're waiting, love, when you first fall in love and there's all those chemicals going around, like, oh, this is amazing, you overlook things. Yeah. And so sometimes I think we don't pay enough attention to the red flags that are there. I think sometimes people change. Yeah. And if I had met my husband when we were 16, I wouldn't have had anything to do with him because I was a total dork / nerd. And like, he was doing pot and shooting things and not people. And it's like, he'd be like, oh yeah, so-and-so was building a house. I took my gun out and just shot all the shingles. And I'm like, ah! Do you ever tell our kids that? To the moon. But I was like, what gives you the right? He goes, well, I don't do it anymore. And I'm like, well, that's a good thing, because if I'd have known that, it'd have been
wouldn't have been. If I would have known that. That's a common saying in marriage.
Well, it's like, all I ever want to do is travel. Yeah. And we get married, and like, we're getting ready to go on the honeymoon. He goes, I hate to travel. And I'm like, no. You didn't tell me that. That's false advertising. It's like, before we got married, it's like, he rode bikes with me. He went swimming with me. He went running with me. Yeah. We get married. I'm like, hey, you want to go on a bike ride? And he's like, nope, I hate bikes. And I'm like,
so false advertising.
Well, like, I thought I found somebody to do that stuff with for the rest of my life. And he's like, well, now I've seen you naked. I don't need to see you in shorts.
But is that how guys look at it?
And I said, no. I make no representation of anybody else. There's a lot of amazing, amazing men out there. And I looked at him and I said, did you really just say that out loud? Because that was not very smart. And he goes, did I say that out loud? No, that's not what I meant.
But that goes to the happiness part, right?
So I found somebody else to ride bikes with, not a guy. I was like, well, there's a workaround.
Well, you got to do what you have to do.
I'm going to keep you for a while and see if we can work the rest of it out.
But I think that what you just said is important, though, as far as like happiness, finding our own. It's important that we find our own happiness, and then we look for people, whether that be in a romantic relationship, a job, to enhance that happiness or to grow that happiness.
As humans, we have a lot of needs, and I say if I have 10 different rings of needs, and one friend might be able to fill those needs for me on 1, 3, 7, and 6, and another friend might be on number 10, and another friend might be 2, 4, and 6. We're a little bit different when we're around different people, because they're bringing out different parts of us, and I think that's a good thing. But I don't think it's fair to expect one person to be able to meet your needs on every level. And to me, a relationship I like relationships where the other person can stretch me a little bit. Where I'm going, tell me more about that, because I don't know. They're broadening my horizons. They're making me see something from a different perspective. They're knocking me out of my preconceived notions and making me at least think. Now, I might or might not change my mind. But to do that, you have to come to somebody with compassion. Yeah. You can't attack them. Right. You should and you shouldn't. No. Right. You say, have you ever looked at it this way? Have you ever thought blah, blah, blah? Because when we can put away the emotions and come to each other with grace and compassion, that's when great change and growth happens. Yeah. And life's a journey. It's fun.
Yeah. I most certainly, I agree wholeheartedly. I think, again, when you talk about all of these things that we've talked about with the emotions, one other thing I want to touch on is stress. Because you talk about marriage, there's certain stresses that come with marriage.
With somebody who doesn't think like you do.
Absolutely.
Or may have slightly different values than you do. Yeah. It's like finances is always one, right? Yeah. My husband would go and buy the magazine at the bookstore for $5 every month. And I'm like, you can get a whole dang year's worth for $15. And he goes, well, I might not want 3. And I went...
It changes.
Right. It was crazy. It was like such a little thing. Yeah. And, he was always putting me on a budget, but it seemed like he was spending money willy-nilly. When I was like, don't you tell me, because I was triggered because my father controlled me with money.
Yeah.
And like not giving me any or letting me work or anything. And so then I felt controlled. And, I thought about it and I was like, well, when I look at it, he's not going out with other women and he's not buying booze and I didn't know that till later, but he's not, just wastefully spending it. When he spends it on something that the family can use. And so what's going on here? What was going on is that money was a trigger for him and he had a very scarcity mindset. And he felt very out of control when he didn't know where the money was. And I felt very controlled when he said, you got to be on a budget. And I'm like, what? Because I don't spend a lot of money. But what was happening is I was spending it inconsistently. So I thought about it. And I'm like, okay, does he wake up in the morning and think, how can I piss her off? And I'm like, I don't think any guy's that dumb. So, because it's true that when mama's happy,
yes,
the whole house is happier. And, Disneyland's open too. That's a good thing. So I don't think he's trying to upset me. And I know that I started recognizing, well, okay, he has baggage and I have baggage and our baggage is in different places, but it's buttoned up against each other. It's not us that has the problem. It's our baggage, our things that we never let loose of that's having the problems. And so I sat down and thought about it and I thought, okay, what am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? What am I willing to compromise? So I waited until there was a time when we felt connected. We went out on a date and I felt kind of connected. I said, so, I have an idea. I see that it stresses you. I didn't say, you can't tell me. I said, I see that it stresses you when I spend money. And I said, and it stresses me when you tell me that I can't because I work a lot.
Yeah.
And, I'm not saying it's mine or yours or anything else, but
yeah,
I'm an
it's
adult
ours.
and I have money. And I think that if I really want, something that costs $100, I should be able to go do it. I said, so I'll make a deal with you. When the check is deposited, just take $300 out. And every month, I want to have the ability to spend $300 if I decide to without getting your permission. He goes, well, it's not permission. And I'm like, okay, well, it feels like it.
Yeah.
And so that was good that he said that because it felt like it. I was going to have to ask him permission like I had to with my daddy. I got daddy issues, evidently. And I said, so how about I just get $300 and you don't worry about it. And just every month you just take that out and just say it's not there.
Yeah.
And, if it rides a couple of months, then I got $1,000, but just take it out every month. And if I'm going to spend more than $500, between $300 and $500, I will notify you before I do it. And if I would like to spend a big ticket thing, like a refrigerator or a car or something, then we will have a discussion. Now, nowhere in there did I say, you get to tell me what to do.
Right.
Because then I would have got defensive, I would have got emotional, I wouldn't have been able to have a good conversation. And he thought about it for a while and he goes, I can live with that. Problem solved.
Yeah.
Because we came at it from a slightly different angle when we weren't angry.
Yeah.
And we realized that we both had baggage that had nothing to do with each other. He's not my dad. It's not his fault that my dad did that and I responded that way. And some kid could have been in my situation and interpreted that as being cared for.
Yeah.
But I, in that situation, interpreted it as being controlled. As human beings, we don't, I took my kids to Arizona, 3 of them. And we're talking about the vacation. And one of my kids is like, that's the best vacation we ever had. I had such a good time. And the other kid's like, are you kidding me? That's the worst vacation we ever had.
We had one of those a couple years ago.
I was miserable the entire time. And the third kid goes, we never went to Arizona. And I'm like, okay. So as a parent, we're thinking that we're giving our kids the exact same experience. And we're not because they're experiencing it as individuals.
Yes.
I was trying to be fair to my kids, and I was buying them all the exact same folder for school.
Yeah.
Well, I finally got smart, and I said, okay, school, you get to spend this amount of money for your clothes and all your school supplies. Well, one kid decided she liked cheap clothes, and she bought like 8 different things that mix and match, and she spent a lot of money in her folder because that was important to her. The other kid got like the cheapest pencils and then got his brother to buy half of it. Like, well, I don't know, 15 pencils, so I'll sell you 7, and I'll give you 50 cents back. He didn't care he got the cheapest of everything, but he wanted those Nike shoes. He spent his entire clothing thing on the Nike shoes. And, so it actually worked out much better because I didn't, as a parent, have to worry about being fair because you can't be fair.
Yeah.
Because I'm in a different place financially when the first one's born from the last one's born.
Oh,
it's
for
just
sure.
not fair.
For
the first one gets
sure.
their bike when they're 5 and the last one gets their bike when they're 2. Like, that's not fair.
So many,
like, you can't do it. So I just said, okay, you'll have the same budget, and then you guys got to figure out what you like, how to spend it, and calculate tax.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I didn't expect is they started wheeling and dealing.
Mm.
Well, if I buy this, will you buy that?
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'll take half of this and half of that. And I'm like, well, if we pool our money, we can get one of these, but we can both use it.
Yeah.
And the little one's getting taken advantage of. But that's a life lesson, so I let it happen. Don't tell him I said that. But it was just really, really interesting.
I think that...
And I'm not saying I'm a good parent. Like, sometimes I'm...
No, actually, I think
accidentally
parenting
make a good
is
choice.
hard. And
sometimes I actually make a good choice. And,
we have to tell ourselves that we're good parents.
With a different kid, maybe it wouldn't work. Like, you don't know.
Yeah. But you know what? Parenting, you're practicing parenting every single day.
Every single day. And every kid's different, and every situation is different.
Yeah.
And how you perceive it is different because of where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or because you're baggage sometimes.
You got to win the day, and that's true. Mm-hmm. I think that, and I'm going to backtrack just slightly. You talked about the triggers in marriage. And I think that one of the most helpful things is having those tough conversations in the beginning, talking about what does trigger and talking about our past. See, I think people run away from the past. We start we want to bury the past because we're ashamed of it or because it wasn't good. But the reality of it is that it helped shape who we are.
And
it's a part of us.
Taught how to ask for what we need.
Yeah.
And that's why I love the book, The Love Languages, because it helps you have a vocabulary for how to ask what you need. We tend to do for other people what we wish they were doing for us.
Yes.
And especially women do that.
Yeah.
Well, he should know if he loved me. How's he going to know?
If you don't, closed mouths don't get fed. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's he going to know? Poor guy. He's just
Closed
I just
mouths
want her
don't get
happy.
fed.
I want Disneyland open. I don't know why she's grumpy all the time.
And I think by now we figured out what Disneyland is. It's the PG version.
That's fun.
But no, I think that, but I heard somebody say, there's the golden rule, which is treat others how you want to be treated. Then there's the platinum rule, which is treat others how they want to be treated.
Absolutely.
And what you just said speaks to that, because a lot of times we go into relationships, whether it be friendships or romantic, treating people how we want to be treated and not asking them how they want to be treated.
My husband gave me compliments constantly. You're so beautiful. I love you so much. Words mean nothing to me. I grew up in a stoic German family, and I'm like, you lie for a living and you're a marketer. And all he wanted from me was for me to say, I love you, I need you, I want you.
Yeah.
And I never said it.
Yeah.
Well, eventually I kind of caught on, And, I'm somebody who wants quality time and acts of service. So I was doing his laundry for him. He never asked me to do that. Of course, after I've been doing it a few years, he's like, yeah, this is good. Don't stop. Don't stop.
Don't stop now.
But I trained him. I created the monster by doing what I thought a wife was supposed to do. I never asked him, what did he want a wife
There
to do?
is a message in that, ladies.
And then I blamed him.
And creating
then I
monsters.
blamed him after I created him. Like, how is that fair?
I need to go back to the drawing board on that and ask George, does he want me to do his laundry? Does he want me to do the things? Because I think that I can lift some duties off of myself. Or I can ask him, okay, would you prefer for me to do this, but it's going to cost you this? I think that that's important to be able to.
I had a conversation with my husband once. He was complaining about my cooking. He did not like my cooking. My mom got cancer when I was 7. I did not learn how to cook. So, when I was growing up, I made runny mashed potatoes and burnt hamburgers and slimy peas like every night. And that was it. And I never got interested in it.
I've been there.
Till a lot later. And so I get married and he's like, food woman. And I'm like, so I'm making vegetables. Like, I love vegetables. All I make is vegetables. And so one night he calls me from work and he's like, honey, I made dinner for you. I'm like, oh, great. I want to get my tasters up. What are we having? And he's like, hot dogs and potato chips. And I said, oh, great. Can we have a second vegetable? And he's like, well, we got bread and potato chips. And I'm like, okay, if I say anything, he's never going to cook again. But if I accept it, he's going to give me the same shit every time. So how am I going to fix this?
Where's the balance?
Totally different perspectives.
Yeah.
I'd been making him all these vegetables. He's like, I don't do vegetables.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny. So he comes, he goes, well, you're the woman, like you should cook. I said, well,
That part.
honey, it's like this. I'm a great doctor. And I'm a great guide for Disneyland. Now, I'm only capable of being great at two things at once. So which one of those do you want to give up so I can go take cooking lessons?
Let me guess, you never learned how to cook.
No. But I will also say I ate a lot of stuff that I didn't like because he cooked it.
Yeah.
Because if that's the deal you're going to make, then you gotta be willing to. If you settle for something, then you have to gladly accept the results of what you settled for.
I think seeing the effort and seeing the heart, seeing the intention, and a lot of times we complain about what we're not getting, and then when we get it, we complain about that too. For example,
It's not good enough.
George doesn't do laundry, but if he did the laundry, I know that I would not be happy with how he folds or hangs the clothes.
There you go.
So
you can't put him in a no-win situation.
This is true. And a lot of us, that's exactly what happens, especially in marriages, is we put each other in a no-win situation. But I think that you answered to that, like you gave a few examples of how communication and compromise, how that's important.
The problem is sometimes we don't know what it takes to make us happy. We just know we're not happy.
Yeah.
And especially if you've had a couple of relationships, like you got baggage.
Yeah. Identifying that baggage. Well, as we get ready to wrap up, I do want to put a name to essentially, you use the term that your genetics are not your destiny. Your genes are not your destiny. But there is the term epigenetics.
Yes, that's it. So,
I said I practiced it in my head as I read it because I did not want to mess it up. But I encourage everyone to look more into that. You have choices. We all have choices to be better. We don't have to accept, our parents' habits, the bad habits that were placed on us as children. We can say, no, I don't like that, especially when we become adults.
It's not for me.
And as parents,
and
when we have children,
patients too will say, I said, well, you should try this and this. And they go, well, no, I can't. I was raised that way. And I said, well, you have a daughter. And my patient's like, yeah. And I said, so do you want her to do something because you showed her the wrong way? And she's like, of course not.
Exactly.
And I'm like, I think I smell a hypocrite.
Yeah. So
and I only recognize hypocrites because I'm one. Takes one to know one.
Exactly. Well, change is good. Well, thank you so much. So much.
It's been fun.
Yes, absolutely. You've shared a lot of information. And if you want to get a hold of Dr. Diane Voss, you can most certainly reach out to her. Reinvent Your Health in Independence, Missouri. That is her practice. So you can find her via Google, or we'll make sure to tag her website as well. She is always taking opportunities. So don't hesitate. But thank you. All right. Take care. Until next time.